Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. All right, today I have a special guest for you guys, someone I've worked alongside covering the Giants for the last several years. I'm thrilled to be joined by Associated Press Giants reporter, New Jersey sports reporter, Tom Canavan. Tom, thank you so much for a few minutes.
No problem, Ed.
And I'm having Tom on today because this is a special week for Tom Canavan. This is the final week of Tom's 49-year career with the Associated Press. 41 of those years spent covering the New York Giants, the good, the bad, the ugly of the Giants. So, Tom, congratulations on the retirement.
Thank you, Ed. And it's been a great run. It's been fun. It's been up and down. And lately it's been down. But hey, they paid me to do this.
And I know this wasn't the career that you thought you were going to have, but it certainly has been a nice run for you.
Sure. I mean, I went to college thinking I was going to go to med school, and year and a half of biology and chordate metamorphosis and chemistry. And I realized that maybe another line of work would be good.
Yeah, yeah. So you spent your life in New Jersey, watching the ups and downs of the New York Giants, and I want to ask you, just right up front, a pure memory from covering the Giants. You started in 1984, right? The
Correct.
Giants, Bill Parcells days. Um, do you have a favorite memory of covering the Giants, or even a favorite person or player that you've ever covered for the Giants in all that time?
I don't think there's one player that sticks out. I mean, there's just been a lot of good players. There are a lot of been average players who I liked, who were just fun to be around. Um, I think if there's one memory that stands out, it's winning that first Super Bowl in '86. I mean, and it was just so you know I was on the beat for what 2 3 years, and they were champions. And it was I remember being at the Super Bowl in Pasadena, and at halftime they didn't look like it was a game,
Right.
and Denver had a chance to be ahead by more than uh, they were. And then in the second half, it was a whole different story. It was the Giants woke up and they dominated.
And I know from I've talked to Gary Myers a few times over the years, and I read Gary's book, Once a Giant, recently, and that was a special group. That was a really
Oh,
interesting special group of guys.
oh, absolutely. I mean, first you start off with LT and Harry, and it really was. Most people think of Phil Simms and the great game he had, and McConkey and Bavaro, but that defense was just something special. From the line to the linebackers, the secondary wasn't the best in the world, but with the pressure that the front seven got, they were a good group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just curious, do you have any we'll stay on that group. We'll stay on that 1980s, run by the Giants for a while. Just any special Bill Parcells memories, Bill Parcells interactions that stick out in your mind?
Well, obviously that year it was um, every time they won, it was the Gatorade bath, and that became legendary. Um, I think the first year I was on the beat uh, was the getting a chance to meet Bill Parcells for for the first time, and I was going down in the elevator. It was a one-floor elevator trip, one floor down to the basement of Giant Stadium, and I knew he had a nickname, and I said, "Do they call you Flounder?" And he goes, "No, Tuna." I mean,
What-
I made a great impression, and
yeah.
but yeah, and I mean, what was always interesting was that Parcells, I don't know if he changed later on. I think he did, but he would sit down and talk with the media, and he would, you know, ask the routine questions, give the routine answers. And then when he was done, it was almost like he took a step back and said, "Okay, we done. Let's talk." And it would be in everybody put their pens and pencils down, and the tape recorders would go off, and he'd just talk. And I mean, it was those things don't happen anymore. I mean,
Right.
you need a special dispensation, like once a year, like a GM might call you into his office and just say, "Let's talk off the record." Those things rarely happen. And but with Parcells, it was pretty much at least weekly, and it was a great experience because you understood some of his thinking. You understood if he wanted to get on a player's case, he could. I mean, if Jumbo Elliott wasn't playing well at tackle, he'd say, something, Jumbo's playing like whatever word he wanted to use. And then everybody would put a little zinger in their story, and Jumbo would get the message.
Hmm.
And he knew how to play the press. He was good.
Absolutely. And you mentioned how much it's changed. Just we'll talk a little bit about the business, but how much has the NFL changed in all
Oh,
the time that you've been doing this?
it's become more corporate. Um, Everybody has a layer of screening. We used to call it, when I first got into the business, flack. There was somebody who would, like when the planes came over in World War II, before they hit the target, there was, you know, gunfire to try and knock them out of the sky before they got to the target. Well, that's what the NFL has become with their PR and limiting access to, let's say, three players uh, on certain days. And, it's more frustrating than, than it used to be. I don't think you can talk to as many players um, as much as you want.
I've
And
always, I've always, I've had this conversation with Gary Myers, and I've had this conversation with Steve Serby of the Post a little bit too, and I've always been jealous of, since I mean I started covering the Giants in '07. All right, and by that point in time, things had already changed. There wasn't the kind of access that there used to be, and I've been jealous of that opportunity to really get to know these guys, to really get to know the executives, to even be able to walk around the building and talk to people without a PR person, trailing you everywhere you go. Um, just how different is that, and how much easier was it to just make relationships, in the '80s, '90s, early 2000s?
it was much easier. I mean, I remember some of the older guys when I was there. I didn't know about this right away, but after practice was over and the players were leaving, they'd see them in the parking lot. So
Hmm.
there was access to the players' parking lot. So I mean, you could you got them in the locker room, and then if you wanted more, you met them out in the parking lot.
Hmm. And that's not going to happen now.
Hey,
No.
we can't even get into the players' parking lot. There's a moat around it.
Right.
uh, yeah, there's a guard gate, and we park in a separate lot.
Right. So it's just such a different time. Um, I'm curious, just favorite players that you've covered over the years.
Uh, there are guys who I like talking to. Um, Sean O'Hara was always great.
Hmm.
I liked the kickers and the offensive linemen. I thought they were fairly interesting people. Uh, there's a good group there now. I mean, Dexter
Mm-hmm.
is a great, you know, quote when he's available. He's very honest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's what I've always looked for, guys who will tell you what they think and not be afraid to say it.
And I've always liked the guys who maybe weren't the Dexter Lawrences, who maybe weren't the Malik
Sure.
Neighbors, guys that weren't the superstars. The guy that's the long snapper, or the guy that's fighting like crazy to make the roster, because those guys, I always find that those guys, A, they have stories, and B, they're much more willing to share, because in some cases nobody wants to talk to them.
Sure. I mean, point in case. I mean, there's a guy on the practice squad now, Casey Rogers, who defensive lineman, and basically he couldn't decide whether he wanted to be a professional lacrosse player or a football player. He's coming out of high school, and his father was a lacrosse coach up at Syracuse, and you know and that's just it. He chose lacrosse, but he still has a great interest in lacrosse. And if you look in his locker, he's got a lacrosse helmet.
Nice. Nice. I Casey's way over there in the corner.
Yes.
And I way over in the farthest corner of the Giants locker room. And honestly, I rarely make my way over there. So, but about Amir Smith Marset, I think lockers next to Casey, and that's
Yes.
about that's
Yes.
about as that's about as I've ventured over there a few times to talk to Amir, who he's another one of those guys who's a nice guy, punt returner, kick returner, nice guy, likes to talk,
Yeah.
always always an interesting conversation. But I
A local kid too. He's from Newark.
yeah, and I it's you I always wish that there was more time to get to know these guys.
Oh yeah.
So
I mean, the interesting thing though is at times they're the guys who you probably don't want to talk to, but they are available.
absolutely. And in a losing season like this, if you always found, I know I do, it's so much harder to cover a losing team than a winning team. So much harder, just because, like, even the attitude in the locker room the other night, you could feel the difference the minute you walked in the room after a win. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, when guys are losing, it's they don't want to see you, because they have nothing to say, because they know you're going to ask them questions about how miserable it is. And I can't
Right.
blame them either, but it's just so much easier to cover a team when it wins.
Yeah, and I mean, what you'll find after a win is that they'll actually hang around a little longer too. I mean, after a loss, sometimes we finish with Dable and walk to the locker room, and half the people are gone.
Absolutely. And I know if you happen to skip Dayball, who the head coach speaks for a few minutes before the locker room opens up for people who don't understand the logistics of all of that. If you walk down there, you'll see player after player after player leaving the locker room before we even get in there. And 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 not just the guys who didn't play either. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
guys you want to
Sure.
talk to, and,
Yep.
and they know you want to talk to them, so they're out of there as quickly as they can.
Yep.
But the other night, guys would have stayed and talked as long as they possibly could have.
Yes.
By the way,
Yes.
that for the final, as weird as it is, it's a final football game that you'll cover. That was a fun game to cover.
It was, and I mean, there was so much to write about that was out of the normal.
Hmm.
And I had to do a story since I'm an AP guy. You have to cover the other city, so you have to also include something on, the Colts pretty much giving a half-hearted effort in a game where, their playoff future, was ended,
Hmm.
and it was an interesting, scenario there too, because you scratch your head and you go, how can these guys play like this when they
Hmm.
have at least an outside chance of getting to the postseason?
Not a good look for Shane Steichen.
No.
Indianapolis coach. Not a good look for him at all. Tom, I have got to ask you, switch gears a little bit. Um, I have got to broach the Eli Manning topic with you.
Hmm.
Um, we know he's a finalist for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We know that former Daily News columnist, Gary Myers will be the presenter for Eli, when the committee meets. Bob Glauber, former columnist for Newsday, is also one of the voters, one of the committee members. And I know both of those guys think Eli's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but it's it's such a contentious debate. And before I ask you which side of it you're on, you covered Eli for longer than I did. Do you just find it weird that for a guy who was as milk toast as Eli was, as vanilla as he was, that that there's just so much controversy, about the whole, is he a Hall of Famer, isn't he a Hall of Famer thing? Because the guy, the guy never went near controversy at all.
Hmm. He did it once with, I think, after Tiki retired, Tiki criticized him, and he went off on Tiki right away, which was out of the ordinary. But yeah, you're right. He is very close to the vest, and I'm even surprised now that when I see him on TV, that he is a little more glib. He's not Peyton by any means, but he's loosened up a bit, and he's more. You can laugh at him a little, and it's nice to see that.
Yeah, I never would have pegged Eli for the TV career that he's made for himself.
Yes, yes.
And so where do you come down on Eli as a Hall of Famer? First ballot, later, not at all. Where do you come down?
I'm unsure, to be perfectly honest. On one side, I see, you know, winning a Super Bowl is rare. Being the MVP twice is, rarer, and I just think that in big games like that, that's where he was at his best. I mean, you look at a lot of his other games that are not, major games, and he's just a good quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. Um, so if I had to decide, I'd say winning two Super Bowls, making big plays at the end, that's probably, I would think, worthy of a first ballot. If he's later on, I'm happy with that. I mean, the problem Eli has is he's always going to be in Peyton's shadow. I mean, Peyton was the quarterback of his time, and every time he went out there was a show. Eli wasn't the same way, but Eli had as much. I don't know how many Super Bowls Peyton won, but I mean,
I think
he
it was
had
two. I think it was two because I think he won one in Indy and then he won one his final
one.
year in Denver
Yeah,
when he was just sort of riding along.
right. And I think that Eli's ability to step up in the big ones was what puts him in that same class as Peyton. I think it's a hard choice, but I think Eli at some point deserves to be in. I think Tom Coughlin at some point deserves to be in. Um, but if anyone gets in this year, it will be Eli.
Yeah, let me ask you this. I think, people a lot of times they point to the number of interceptions Eli threw. They point to his being 117 and 117, for his career as a regular season quarterback. The way I look at that, and I know we judge quarterbacks by wins and losses and all of that. I almost look at that and I think over the last few years of his career after that second Super Bowl, you can almost say that the Giants did Eli a disservice just because it wasn't Eli's fault that things around Eli fell apart.
Sure,
That
the
yeah,
lines weren't as good, the teams weren't as good. Absolutely.
yeah, and that was not on Eli. That was simply, management decisions, whatever, coaching decisions, whatever were made.
Hmm.
I always feel like, but it is what it is, and the record is what the record is. But I always feel like it's somewhat unfair to hold that against Eli, because that last 4 or 5 years to me was not on Eli.
No, and I kind of laugh about that because you look at throughout the league, and there are always quarterbacks who, they play on bad teams. They look like they're having average so-so seasons, and then everything falls together. Sam Darnold in Minnesota, he's a god now. And I mean, when he was with the Jets in Carolina, everybody was going, "This guy, how did he ever get drafted where he got blah blah blah?" And I think at some point, Daniel Jones is going to find the right set of circumstances and the right team, and he'll have his day in the sun.
It's funny because when the Giants let him go, I actually did a story about that, because of, like you said, Sam Darnold, a couple of other guys that have, Baker Mayfield's another one. So much of it is circumstance with these quarterbacks, and I don't know what kind of quarterback Daniel Jones could have been at his ceiling. I just know that the Giants, in my view, never put him in a position to actually find it, at least not in the first 5 years anyway.
Right, right, and totally agree. And who knows? Even a guy like Drew Lock, maybe at some point, he showed for one game he had good stuff and good decisions. And I mean, I don't even know what this team is going to do next year at quarterback. I mean, who's left in the house after this year?
Right.
Tommy. I
Yeah,
mean,
and that's not good. I know that Giants fans in the New Jersey area, I know they love Tommy DeVito, but but you're fooling yourself if you think that Tommy DeVito is a quality starting NFL quarterback. He's a back of the roster, use him when you have to use him, kind of guy. He's a guy he's going to end up with Tim Boyle's career.
mhm.
which isn't bad work if you can get it, to be honest.
Sure. I mean, it's a good paycheck, and but I mean, it it's hard to figure out where the Giants go from here. I mean, I wasn't upset that they lost the one because of the win.
Right.
I don't think there's a great quarterback coming out. I think there are guys who are going to play well, but I don't. I think any one you take is going to be a gamble. I mean, the Bears took Caleb Williams, and he had an average year. And Bryce Young in the Panthers is still searching. And there have been a number of guys who have been taken one or very high, and they just haven't worked out. And then
Right.
and you look at guys like Jalen Hurts, who was taken in the 53rd choice, and he's one of the best in the game.
Yeah, it's so hard to predict, and so much of it is circumstance related. I think, though, let me see if you agree with this. If Joe and Brian get to stay, I don't think they have a choice. I think they have to do what they have to do at this point, entering their fourth year. They have to do what they have to do to bring in a quarterback. I don't think they have a choice.
I think that it doesn't have to be a draft pick, though. I mean, if there's somebody out there, I mean, everybody's saying, well, sign Darno. And I'm sitting there going, Darno with the Giants might be the same as Darno with the Jets and the Panthers and whatever. I
Right.
mean, it's got to be, I don't know who it's got to be, but if they can bring in somebody and get the team to play to improve, I mean, play consistently like they did on Sunday against the Colts, then maybe. But
Right.
uh, taking a flyer on Cam Ward or Sanders or who, Dylan Gabriel. There's just so many of those guys out there. Which is guys, who's the one?
Right. Right. Prime time would tell you that it's Shadur, but we don't know.
Yeah, he had a great game in the bowl.
We don't know. Let me ask you this: you've covered the Giants long enough to know that the Mara family doesn't intentionally bring the circus to town.
Right.
Okay. Um, think about Shadur Sanders, and fairly or not, you always think about the specter of his father, hovering above him and hovering above whatever organization Shadur lands with. Can you see, John Mara being hesitant to go there?
I think at this point, John would be hesitant, but at the same time, I think he's bought into the system of, you look at the analytics, you look at um, what I guess Shadur is going to meet with, the Giant team, the psychologist, everybody who vets an incoming player, and whatever they tell him, I think, you know, he'll sit down and say, that's the way you think, I'm along for the ride. I don't see him putting his foot down and saying no.
So so who's making that decision in the end, and who's coaching this team? Is it Joe and Dave's? Is it Joe and somebody else? Is it a new GM, a new head coach? What's your guess?
Uh, I've had this question swirling for weeks, and my son is a big sports fan, and he was saying, "Well, I don't see how you can keep the GM and bring in a coach when the coach is under a 1 year mandate to be successful. Uh, I don't know how you keep Dave's after the long losing streak. I mean, and to bring in a whole new show for 2025 is, people are going to be going, here we go again."
Right.
So and it's uh,
It's such a hard situation because there isn't a clear right answer.
no, there isn't. And
It's
I mean, I thought they had a good answer in 22. I was impressed with the guys they brought in, and
mhm. Yeah,
what can you do? And I mean, their choices in the last whole bunch of years are, they seem to be good choices. You had McAdoo with his offensive, you know, pedigree from the Packers, and Shermer with the Vikings, and Joe Judge with his Belichick background, although that might have been a warning sign. Um, and this group, I mean, they started off and they had success right away, and then it just went the wrong way.
what are your thoughts? I have to ask you, you've known John Mara longer at this point than just about anybody in the media room. And I mean, John Mara, your planes flying overhead and people taking to social media to say all sorts of vile things about John Mara. I mean, what is your feeling about John Mara? And maybe Steve Tisch too. It's such an interesting ownership situation. I think the Giants are the only dual ownership situation in the NFL. But mostly I'm curious about just what you think of John Mara and the type of owner that he is.
I think John's kind of a sensitive guy. I know he's emotional when he watches games. Um, he's a fan in the truest sense of the word. He wants his team to win, and so I think he is, he's very much hears what the fans are saying, and he wants the same thing. Um, but at the same time, John's a lawyer, And John knows that you've got to have some type of, system in place to run a team by. And uh, if the system's not working, you change it or you work to change it. So, as much as it probably hurts him, all this stuff, he has probably a belief that I'm going to follow a system that we've lived by. We bring in good people. We try our hardest to win. Sometimes we've been successful. Sometimes we haven't. Mostly they haven't been lately. And I think in that sense, he's a smart guy who is, he's hurt as much as the fans are.
Yeah, I feel bad when I hear all of this. Sell the team, let other people make. Get your nose out of the decisions and all of that, and that's just not going to happen. The New York Giants have been the Mara family business for 100 years, and it's
Right.
going to stay that way. It's their family business, and they're going to have something to say about how it runs.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I mean, and at some point there, it's going to get better. I mean, I keep on hoping instead of bringing in all these offensive gurus, they bring in some guy who can make this defense what it used to be. And if you look at a team like the Ravens, I mean, they found a great quarterback, but they've always been a contender because they've had outstanding defenses.
Right? There's still the NFL has changed and it's more pass happy, and there's not and they don't allow some of the hits that they used to allow and all of that. But to me, it's still about the offensive and the defensive lines, and it's about the blocking and the tackling. And because if you can't do those things, the fancy quarterback and the fancy wide receiver don't matter.
Right. You win up front, you win.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier, you mentioned Tom Coughlin.
Mm-hmm.
Just I cannot believe, and I'm no offense to Mike Holmgren, although maybe it is an offense to Mike Holmgren, but to me, I can't fathom how Mike Holmgren is a Hall of Fame finalist before Tom Coughlin. Just your thoughts on Coughlin getting snubbed, and your just thoughts on Coughlin, maybe a TC story if you've got one.
Well, my favorite TC story is how Tom would always, you know, the media would once Tom had given an answer, he wasn't going to change it, and if you've been around him long enough, you knew it. And the group of media that Tom had around him always wanted to ask the question in a different way. I used to love to stand there and watch the expression on his face when the third and the fourth same question was asked in a different way. And you just see he was going, "Are you guys stupid? Are you not listening?" And it to me that was Tom. He was very straight in his ways. He had a set schedule. I mean, I remember talking to the interns and they had to have the newspapers in his office by 5 o'clock so he could read all the newspapers before he started, doing the work and things like that. And I what I like about Tom is not only did he win two Super Bowls, he took a fledgling Jacksonville franchise. And I think was it the first year they went to the AFC or the second year title game?
I think it was the second year, but yeah, I mean, he built that program
And I mean,
almost the way you'd build a college program,
right,
or a semi-pro team from scratch.
right. And
And
most people forget that he was part of Parcells' staff.
yeah, yeah. So, but I mean, I probably way back in the day when I started, I might have been a little scared of Coughlin, but you learn to you over the years you learn to appreciate Coughlin for what he is, and for how much he cared about people, and how much he cared about doing things the right way.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. He was
Well,
just like look at his foundation and the cancer and he had the situation up at BC where one of the kids you know, went through a cancer situation, and it was tragic. And so, I mean, Tom cared about people for his
Absolutely.
rough nature. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Tom, I think we've covered it. We've covered a good bit here. I'm just curious. The last thing I'll ask you, we talked about it at the top. This will be your last week doing this, doing or covering the Giants. Um, what are you going to miss the most? What are you going to miss the most? I know it's not us goofballs in the media room, but what are you going to miss the most about doing this job?
Actually, that is what I will miss. I mean, it was just being around people, um, seeing how the media room interacted with everybody. Um, I like that. I mean, and that's going to be hard to replace in your life when you retire because you're not around it all the time. So I think I'll miss that. I won't miss writing, deadlines, previews, capsules, you name it. I won't miss talking to the bosses. Um,
Oh,
and I'll enjoy, just doing what I want to do. And
there you
I'm,
go. There you go. I'm 64. I'm a spring chicken compared to you, Tom. But
oh, thanks a
but
lot.
but yeah, but I'll be following you. I'll be following you sooner rather than later. So anyway, my time's coming pretty soon too. Anyway, I appreciate it, and I know you'll be in the media room through the end of the week, so hopefully I'll see you there, before the end of the week. And appreciate the time, and congratulations on a great run.
Thank you. And if I'm ever up in the Albany area, we'll go to Saratoga, or we'll go to what's the bagel store near U Albany that I used to like.
I'm not
All
sure
right.
what
Well,
I'm
I'm
not
I'm
sure
I'm
what you're
doing some.
referring to, but can't you convince the Giants to come back to Albany, Tom?
It would be easier for you, I'm sure.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. Yes, it
But
would.
I think that's one thing that John Mara said against. he's not, he's not going back to Albany.
Well, I can't blame the Giants for that. They have everything they need. You're right there in East Rutherford, so I can't blame anybody for that. But anyway, Tom, I appreciate the time, and congratulations again. And Giants fans, as always, thank you for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.